They wanted to write like a Godfather type movie, but they didn't have any experience. So they were like, oh, we could do comedy.
Like if he ever made a sequel, this is the movie to make a sequel to.
In his repertoire. And I really hope one day he turns it down a little bit.
He shows up from a later Wes Anderson movie.
3, 2, 1, special noise.
Hello, how are you? And welcome to Josiah is Right About Film. I am Josiah. I am a writer with a master's in screenwriting from USC, and I'm a member of the Producers Guild, and I just love movies. So this is a little podcast where I bring on various friends and we talk about movies. Today's movie is Bottle Rocket with my great friend Aaron Watson. So let's dive right on into Bottle Rocket, and let's meet Aaron.
Hi, my name is Aaron Watson. I'm a software developer from Pittsburgh, PA. I've been Josiah's friend since elementary school, I think, right?
That sounds about right, yeah.
We're back. And big fan. So
you better be. If we've been friends for life,
always.
You better be a fan of me. As I'm a fan of you as a person, you should be a fan of my work and the little world that online that I'm a part of here. So we are going to talk about Bottle Rocket today. And the reason I wanted Aaron on this episode is because he's the person that introduced me to this film and Wes Anderson. And it's funny because I was thinking about this when I was researching it, how I first heard about this movie. At the time this movie came out in the 96. I'll give you some stats on it in a second. At the time, Friday nights was the new movie on Cinemax, and Saturday night was the new movie on HBO. And that's how was the flow of my life at that time. Yeah. And so on Friday, I remember there was promos for the Cinemax movie, which was Bottle Rocket. And but I never watched it. I remember seeing it though, after the fact. And then I assume you probably watched it, right?
Yeah. I didn't have a choice, which I could get into.
We'll get to that in a second.
Yeah.
But it's funny because the movie just, for whatever reason, for the world audience as a whole, it just the appeal wasn't there. They even market it as Reservoir Dogs for geeks, which is so inaccurate just because they're both heist movies. Yeah. That's on the poster. I saw that. I was like, you're kidding me. No wonder no one wanted to watch this movie. You didn't know what it was about, and you couldn't market it as what it was about. And part of it is we've learned, it's a Wes Anderson movie, which is essentially kind of a genre unto itself. But we didn't know that then. This was just obviously his first feature. And so I didn't see it until later. Aaron told me to see it. So we'll talk about that in a second, but let's get to the film stats first. And we might talk about this bit too. There was a short film first, which they shot all the same people, even down to the guy who plays Bob was in it as well. So all these guys, Owen Wilson and Wes Anderson, I know were college buddies at University of Texas. And then, obviously Luke Wilson's his brother, et cetera, but they made a short film of it. And that short played at Sundance. And it's funny because my film festival, which Aaron's one of the few people to attend when we held it in Pittsburgh, it was that was a decently sized event, but I mean, we only had LA, Pittsburgh, and Seattle, and no one went to Seattle, but the LA and Pittsburgh were our successful events. But I'm saying, other than that, there weren't a lot of actual film festival events. And so part of what our goal was when we had that film was a lot of short films are really pitches for features. It's here's a short film. I've showed you what I can do and let me make the full length version of it. So that's essentially what you have here. This then got seen by, who was it? It eventually got to James L. Brooks. My notes, I can't read. I drew arrows and it's confusing me, but it eventually got to James L. Brooks. But let's talk about, so that film, so the short was shot in 1992. Then it was shown at Sundance in 94. And then this came out in 96. So think about that process. You have 4 years from the short film to this. And plus, who knows how long leading up to the short, just shows you how these things can go. And what, if Wes Anderson never makes this film, maybe he never has a career. And the
Wilson brothers too, right? Yeah.
No, exactly. Yeah, I'm forgetting them.
Yeah.
This movie. It's funny how
I watch them a little bit too.
Yeah, and it's so definitive for all of them, and how couldn't have not been. So the feature now, Bottle Rocket, was released in February 16th, 1996 at a budget of $7 million. So pretty decently budgeted film for that time for a first-time director. And it grossed $500,000 at the box office. I rounded down slightly, but it was like 526,000 or something that. So that tells you that's a pretty big failure. Plus, they obviously didn't overmarket this thing. But February release date is a sure sign that it's probably not going to do well, especially a February release date post Valentine's Day. And this certainly isn't a Valentine's movie, even though there's a bit of a romance in there. Directed by Wes Anderson, as we mentioned, written by Wes Anderson and Owen C. Wilson, with that C is the credit there. Anthony is Luke Wilson, Owen's brother. Dingman is Owen Wilson, mentioned, who wrote this. Bob is played by Robert Musgrave. And Inez is played by Luma Cavosa. Forgive my Spanish pronunciation, combined with my inability to read my own writing. It was produced by Cynthia Hargrave and Polly Platt. And I think Polly Platt, I believe, is the producer that got it to James L. Brooks, like through the Sundance screening, I think, at least according to
I think she was on some of the behind the scenes stuff, I think, or you know what I mean, talking about the
Cool. And it basically, it's funny because this show, seeing this now, this is tied to The Simpsons because James L. Brooks, it's Gracie Films that released it, which I didn't make that connection until watching this. Music by Mark Mothersbaugh, cinematography by Robert Yeoman, who has since gone on to do, I mean, he's done a lot of movies before and since this, but basically is Wes Anderson's
cinematographer for these later films.
And before that, though,
you can see it. Yeah.
And to be fair, before that, he's doing things like Playboy bedtime stories and The Wizard, the Fred Wizard. So those are two of your credits leading up to this. How did you talk about how you came to this film? I kind of teased little bits and pieces of it, but how did you find this film that you could then tell me about it?
Well, I kind of jokingly, I didn't have a choice to watch this film because this was the summer, I believe, that I had my infamous hip injury playing baseball. So I was actually like laid up in bed at the time, I believe. I think it was the same summer. And I kept seeing, it was the same thing. I kept seeing the commercials too on Cinemax. I'm like, yeah, I'll take a chance. And I don't know if I watched it when it came out or I watched it on a repeat or, you know, when it had aired later. But I just remember it really striking me. Like everything about this movie feels so fresh for the time. Like I just love the dialogue. I mean, and later on, it's Wes Anderson. So later on, you kind of, it's not like he's got a very distinctive style and a very distinctive vision. I think you can see it blossoming here. Like the dialogue, is fast. It's very dry humor, which I like. It's very subtle. It's not over the top in any way, which might be why, except maybe James Caan, which might be why they had trouble, selling it. Like, what is this thing? Like, it's a great story, but it's not a epic romance. It's not, a sci-fi. It's not action.
It's like, and especially like you said, the over the topness, it's comedy, but it's not like broad comedy. It's a very subtle thing. And as we know now, it's like, oh, it's a Wes Anderson.
It's a Wes Anderson.
And now it's funny because things that have come since that aren't by him as well would have that sort of style and temperament. And it's funny how, like, thinking about it, how you and I both, like, this is one of the things, like, looking back, it's like, oh, the influence on our humor now as adults, where it's much more dry and like that subtlety, and as opposed to look at me, I'm a silly guy. Although we have those moments, but
hey, this was
but as you said, the movie was rather, and still kind of is, even amongst his film catalog, it's almost harder to find. But I think that happens with it being a first film because it's almost that thing, you're trying to get your movie made. You got to pitch it in a way that's like simple. It's like a heist comedy. And they're like, oh, okay, that'll sell. That kind of appeal. But then it's like, well, it's not really that. It is, but it isn't. So. Yeah.
I think they said that's what they didn't know. I was watching a little bit about the behind the scenes, documentary about it. And they had said, like, they wanted to write like a Godfather type movie, but they didn't have any experience. And so they were like, oh, we could do comedy. And I think it's ironic, like not ironic, but they wrote this kind of heist movie, and I would figure, like it's almost so parallel to trying to make a film, like you're trying to all this, you know what I mean? It's like you're reaching for this thing that seems unattainable, to be a criminal or to be, to make a movie, and you have to, all this money and all this stuff and all this planning. I feel like there's some parallel there between the movie making process and what they were trying to, and what the film was about. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
These brothers trying to do this. You know what I mean?
And it's funny because you talk about that. That's basically, a lot of people say that is what Christopher Nolan's The Dream one. What's the movie name? Inception. That it's really about like filmmaking and trying to make a movie, and it's a dream movie that's really a heist movie, but it's that idea. It's really about the struggles of trying to get this thing made and to get this thing to work, and you try this out and try that out. And that's really when you especially when you can look back on this in the scope of his career, you can see it's really testing a lot of those things out that become staples later. And like those moments and character types in particular, obviously the Wilson brothers and the collaboration, particularly with Owen Wilson, here and there coming in and out and actually writing with him on different things, but appearing in a lot of them. And you see, like, it's like trying it out. Okay, what works, what doesn't? And you have a movie that overall works, but there's things that clearly aren't as strong as others. And, like the idea, like some of the jokes, for example, the idea for the romance, there's jokes in there that are funnier than they play because they play it so unbelievably subtly. And I feel like Wes Anderson later would understand, okay, maybe we play that up just a little bit more so it reads to the audience. The humor in it, like the moment when getting ahead, where like specifically jumps out with Inez and trying to, there's some moments that work really well, like the translation moments, but when they're in the bar or outside the bar, and he's like, "Boy, that guy kept what a chatterbox," and like it was funny, but it didn't play as well as I think it would have in a a movie, just even like how it would have played in Rushmore, just that much more like embracing the weirdness. I think is what he learned in this movie.
He turns it, all the following movies, he just turns the knob, and the knob just keeps getting turned with this Wes Anderson-ness. I don't know how to define it exactly. But here's where like it started, and you can kind of see the elements there. But then, like in Rushmore's next, and then more in Royal Tenenbaums, and then more in Steve Zissou, and then it just kind of, that's where he kind of planes out, but or plateaus out. But it definitely, you can see him playing with the dry humor, the quirkiness of the characters. And everything too, in the beginning, he does like the planning montage, right? Which is in a lot of the other movies too, which always reminds me of you in a certain sort of way, like how we would plan to do all this stuff and write it down. Here's what we're going to do. And like, that's the way kids are. And I think that's why like this movie is like the perfect movie to see when you're like 15, 18, and you're like, that angst about growing up, you're like all the characters are like on the cusp of adulthood, and they don't really know what to do with themselves. Like Anthony is like coming, and I'm starting to get into the story, but Anthony's like, trying to, he's not insane. He's in a hospital. He's getting help. He's in for exhaustion, and Dignan has now been messing around with this group of criminals, and Bob is kind of just a loser, and they all want something. They want to have an adventure, right? Like Anthony kind of gets tugged in with Dignan, pulled in with Dignan on this, and Bob just wants to do it because he wants to spite his brother, and he's kind of losers. They all want to have this adventure and do this thing. They don't really want to like just go into adulthood and into jobs initially. You know what I mean? And I think that's where I think that energy that it brings, especially in that first act, when they're doing the robbery, we're going to do this, and this is what we're going to do. It's going to plan. And they do the robbery. It's great. It's fun. It's fun. It really takes you along for the ride.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And since we're like, I want to jump back to the characters in more detail, but
Absolutely.
you mentioned like us in high school and that energy, and I
That's what it was.
and failed to make a feature film that I did not know was largely inspired by this, and it was a terrible execution of a decent concept, but it was basically my take on the heist movie where. It's about a heist that never actually happens because that same premise that no one really wants to do it. Yeah. They just are doing it for the other guys, their other buddies, that they think the other person needs them to do it. And I think that's kind of the dynamic you have here that, I mean, yeah, like none of them really need to do it. Maybe Bob, but he's the most character on the periphery, but Dignan doesn't really need to do it. He does it because he thinks like this is what Anthony needs.
So I think it's so cool too. Like and James Caan, got suckered into it. Yeah.
And I love though that like he talked about, and kind of jumping back to the character where Anthony describes him as just like, I think it's like in the voiceover part, maybe when he writes the letter to Inez or something, when he, and normally like voiceover is like, oh, that kills the movie, but it worked really well there where it was practical consideration. This is how he's communicating to her. But he like calls Dignan like an eternal optimist or something along those lines. And it's funny because he's just the most positive person that, and like, spoiling the end, obviously we haven't seen this movie in 20
years
almost. Close to the 30 year, right? Almost like 25-ish year. I don't know what the exact math, 1996 and it's 2022 and record this. You've had time.
Skip ahead too.
So whenever he gets arrested in the end, he doesn't mind.
Yeah, exactly.
He's like, I don't hold a grudge against Sonny Corleone. Henry, right? He's Henry, James Caan's character. He just like, whatever. And it's just that positivity that is so really refreshing to see in any movie, then, now, or whatever. This to see a character who's just so like unapologetically positive, even though he wants to be a criminal burglar mastermind.
Yeah, but I took that, like, I it's funny, you jumped in the end, and I didn't want to talk about this because I thought the same thing. I love the ending because exactly that. And I always thought it was just because, well, again, all three of the characters don't really know what they want to do, although Dignan kind of has an idea that he wants to be a robber like James Caan because it's cool. And that's, it's like a kid, like, I would be a robber, but, it's like, no, or a master criminal, more like that. But at the end, he's not, I always took it, he's not angry because he's kind of like, he's eating the burger. It's like, we did it. And he's like, like he accomplished his goal.
Yeah.
He wanted to be a criminal.
Yeah. And it's not, it's not about like the success of the heist or getting the money. It's none of that. It's about the doing it. And like you said, anytime when you look back on those things in life, whatever it is, it's often the process that is the reward, not the payoff. When you think back on things like, as we record this, we're a couple days before the Super Bowl. And although this will release a couple months from now, and you think about that, it's this culmination of this moment. But for anyone on a team of any kind, a team in sports, a team in filmmaking, and any kind of creative endeavor, and just in anything, on any kind of project, a work project, whatever it might be, when you get it done, there's that sense of accomplishment. But it's that process that you really sort of reflect back on and think of moments. And I like on the last episode I recorded there, the first episode was my friend Brian, and we met working on a film, and he said that, that you're in that tense situation, you're in there together. And that's what those three guys really, and especially Anthony and Dignan, it's like that they're together in like, just like, I feel like Anthony, whatever Dignan would want to do, he'd be there for him. He would just be there for him.
Do you think that the one thing that's odd about this movie is which I don't understand, it's minor, but I think it would have maybe worked better, a little better. Do you think they should have been brothers? Because they're not, which is kind of weird because they are and they look alike. And he treats them like his brother. Like you would treat like, oh, you're right. He's so nice to Dignan. He just really, and he's like nice to everybody, but he feels bad for Dignan. So he gets drawn into this thing that he doesn't really want to do. But I'm like, well, that would make more sense if like he was really his brother, you know what I mean? And then you'd be like, well, of course, like it's your brother, you're going to do whatever he the family bond. You know what I mean? I don't know.
It works two ways though, because either way, because I don't think they've ever played brothers in a Wes Anderson movie, which is kind of like, I think it's in a like a running joke within that. Owen Wilson's played brothers with like Jason Schwartzman and the dude from Pianist, but Adrian Brody, but he's not played his own brother's brother in a Wes Anderson movie, and I think that's probably intentional at this point. And I think that it would work from a functional plot point, but I think then the one flaw in that is this is a movie about friendship and how knows friends as family as opposed to about family. I don't know that it would fundamentally change that, but I feel like it might. Because this is going to sound wrong, but with your family, there's that, it's the obligation to be there for that person because they're your family. Not that it is, having kids, that's not the case. Like that. But that's the sort of maybe the external view sometimes. And maybe there's members of your family that can feel that way. And
he wants to genuinely help him. He's not helping him just because he's obligated to.
He
genuinely feels bad.
And I feel like it works. You get that more because you can't cast that doubt because it's easier to turn your back on a friend than a family member. That's just reality.
Yeah.
So as much as all that is, let's jump backwards a little bit because I do want to talk about the short film. Have you seen the short film?
A little bit, a while ago. I haven't not seen it recently.
I accidentally stumbled upon it on YouTube today, and so I'm glad I watched it. But it's really interesting to see because it's your typical. It's much more. It's a student film, a high quality student film. The camera, there's shots though that are shot for shot, dialogue for dialogue from the feature. It's exactly it. It's basically the short is everything up to and after the bookstore robbery. And then, but the difference is you don't see the bookstore robbery, but they talk about the bookstore robbery and they describe everything you do see in the movie. So it's this kind of crazy, like I said, that the pitch for the movie, that's the first chunk or, third. Yeah, the first act. Exactly. That was it. And they found a way to take that make it into the short. It doesn't play exactly the same way, but really very closely. And I just thought that was intriguing, just seeing how that was, like, whether or not it was built. Again, like I said, a lot of shorts are pitches for features, or if it's just this short got buzz, we can make a feature out of this. It could work that way too. Because like George Lucas with THX, he didn't necessarily want to make a feature out of it, but that short got a lot of buzz. And then Coppola's like, you're going to make a feature out of it. I can get you money for that. And then that's kind of how that happened. And this, I don't know the exact story, but I know, like I said, it played at Sundance. And then once they got the deal with Columbia, I think, and they would have notes with like the producers. And the producers were concerned because Owen Wilson and Wes Anderson weren't writing things down in meetings. So like, and it was like a really hard process of rewrites and stuff. And it was like a real struggle. And this is, basically young student filmmakers now in the industry, just in the deep end. And you have to, and then they're not taking notes of like from the notes. They're just not writing things down. They're just like, oh, okay.
That's funny because after all those like montages where he has all this, I always figured that was Wes Anderson's characteristic of being like meticulous or something. I don't know, you know what I mean? A meticulous kind of detailed planner, but maybe he just didn't care what the studio execs had to say.
Maybe that's it, or maybe it's just that. Yeah, that it's funny because like those little things, like every one of the Wes Anderson movies has the let's plan things with a notebook and drawings and all these crazy things and diagrams, as you know, which is very much me, has been forever. I'm the king of lists that I misplace and lose. And even today I went to the grocery store and forgot the shopping list, but it had like a list and it was very unintentionally Wes Anderson, where like things were written in weird places and there was arrows. But that I think that is, but I wonder if it's just maybe a combination of whatever, we're just going to try to do what we want to do, or he's just smarter than they think he is and they can just take it in and process it without needing to write a page of notes here about the movie. So let's talk about the movie. Specifically, we kind of talked a little bit about the Anthony character. So I wanted to talk about Owen Wilson's character of Dignan, which is really, I think both of those characters are sort of the prototype for the Wes Anderson types of characters you'll see. So let's talk about Dignan. What makes that character work for you, or just stand out?
I think you can't. One of the things I think about the movie too is he hit with Owen and Luke Wilson. I mean, they have a ton of charisma, right? I mean, even Dignan does, and you feel bad for Dignan, but I think it's Owen Wilson's like performance, which is he feels he wants to do with something. He wants to have an adventure. He wants to be a criminal, and he plays them in a way that's like very you feel bad for him, but at the same time, he's kind of pulling his friends into this bad situation, which he should not be. But yeah, I think that yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if it's the way he delivers the lines, what he's practiced, but he's got a ton of charisma, and he's very good at the delivery of his lines. And I think it comes off very funny with the dialogue. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think part of it is the fact that Owen Wilson wrote it with Wes Anderson.
Yeah.
And it's a character that's built for Owen Wilson to show you his strengths and to show you what he can do and who he is as a performer, and the uniqueness that allowed him to have a very unique career and performing variations on that character. And he can do a lot as an actor, but he's never better than with Wes Anderson in anything, I think. I mean, because it's that subtlety. And I think I sent you a picture of the Mobius figure from the Loki show, and you mentioned how like the MCU, like I'm like, when you said that joke, I'm like, oh my god, my mind is blown. What Aaron said was in the text was like, oh, there's an theory that it's the alternate timeline. I'm like, oh my god, that's the same guy.
Yeah.
That is like, and even his positivity that he had in that Loki show, he plays it like a Wes Anderson in the MCU in this quirky, and I think it was all intentional. That if you've seen Loki, have you seen Loki?
Yeah.
Okay, it's great, by the way. Obviously, those of you who haven't seen it.
But he's charming. He's he's sincere. He's charming. I mean, and he was in this too. You know what I mean? And he's not like even in like in Cars. I mean, he plays like the same kind of charming. I don't know. It's all, he doesn't. Maybe is there a lot of range? I don't know, but
in Cars he was so good. He looked like a car. It was amazing. How did
it was amazing. That? Great performance.
That's something you should like. Hey, computer guy, how did that work?
Yeah.
But I think it's just the strength of the movie is just what it works. Where it doesn't work, you don't really care as much because the characters are so strong and so sincere. And like you said, both so charismatic in different ways.
Yeah.
And they're both like very subtly charismatic. Like it's not like, I can't even think of an equivalent at the time. Maybe somebody like Matt Damon, who would have been, writing Good Will Hunting at the same time, right around the same period. It's his movie is like a much more, which he wrote for himself as well. It's much more showy. Look at me acting kind of movie. And it's a great film and a great script and did a great job, but it's much more what you would expect an actor to write for himself. These crying scenes, so I can show you all the stuff I can do. Whereas Owen Wilson, it's like, no, let me show you how good I can be at just being really subtle.
Yeah. And
really sincere and really positive with like a sadness underneath it all.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what's great about it. That sadness, that underlying sadness, which is like a thing in Wes Anderson's movies that makes them as quirky as they get, and particularly recently have gotten, which, when the visual style sort of caught up with the character archetypes.
Yeah.
There's always that underlying sadness that makes it real. Like the last movie, I'm going to talk about another movie, but it's a Wes Anderson movie. The last movie that Aaron and I saw together in a theater that I can recall, other than at my film festival, which we were both there, was Life Aquatic. I went and saw that with you. I remember I was home for Christmas break that year, and it was like, I think we were in Monroeville, if I recall correctly.
I thought it was 4 hours of the Woodstock Festival.
Oh my gosh, that might have been after that. That one's I blocked out though. You're probably right. That I think was after that. It was in the same time frame, but you might have been right. We also saw Woodstock at like a midnight showing. Not the right
forever until we just like watched the Who, and then we're like, all right, we're gone. Let's go to Denny's.
And it's like, the intermission. Yeah, because we used to go to the Oaks Theater in Oakmont, Pennsylvania, like across the river from where we grew up, and we would go to their midnight movies where they show the Warriors and Tron. What else did we see? We had a lot of like good classic movies.
A lot of
great Woodstock, not realizing it's 4 hours long.
It wasn't bad. It just after 4 hours, I think we were just like, yeah, we're done.
And we would normally we'd go to Denny's after and get breakfast in the middle of the night kind of thing, because there's a Denny's there in Harmerville across the river on our side of the river.
1,000-calorie breakfast at 2 a.m. Yeah.
And Watson would order extra hash browns every time. And I would get like the buffalo chicken sandwich, and I would take off the bread and eat it separately. And I'd eat the bread, but I would eat it separately and eat the buffalo chicken like it was like a steak or something. Why we do the things we do when we're
the quirkiness of the characters.
We're old men now, and we were trying to be Wes Anderson characters in our lives. We didn't know it, but it was just we were so influenced by those things. But that sort of little diatribe aside, when we saw that movie, I remember like the most powerful moments I've ever seen in a film is the Steve Zissou character is really largely unlikable and kind of a jerk and just doesn't treat people well all the time, but yet you and the people around him still love him. Yeah. And there's that moment, it's this whole quest to see whatever weird fish. And then at the end of the movie, they're on that little sub. And as weird as all it is, as weird as the animation was, the stop motion, which was cool that it was actually stop motion of the fish and stuff, they all put their hands on him as he's like about to cry. And it just always struck me that in the quirkiness and the weirdness, it works because it's held together by a humanity.
I wonder if it remembers me.
And even in this film, that's still there. And it's cool because this is watching a film where he's learning how to be a filmmaker and be a storyteller that he probably had in there. It's all, as a creative person, I'm not comparing myself to Wes Anderson, but it's all in here. It takes a lot of practice and a lot of work to learn how to get it out on any level, let alone when you're as uniquely brilliant as Wes Anderson is, that you got to learn who you are and how to tell your stories. And that's not necessarily an easy thing to do, particularly in the film industry where, like I said, I'm this is partially a guess, but I'm guessing it's like, okay, let's make a heist movie that's a comedy, and you can sell that to people, but it's not really what this is. It could be, they could do anything. It's really the interplay of those two characters and plus Bob to a degree. But Anthony and Dignan, like it's about their relationship and their funkiness, and that's something you would see played up in later movies too, in different ways. Maybe more characters come into the play and play off other characters, like the Darling Limited. It's a similar thing where it's three characters on the train, the three brothers dealing with it. Or Rushmore, it's really one character. It's sort of against the world, that for thinking he's against the world, but it's still about how those people care for him and the reality, so okay.
Well, I think that and you can see that like what I think it's the third act or right before the third act or whatever in this, where like Dignan is they finally are reunited, right? Because it's funny, like after the heist, they kind of go on the lam, and then everything kind of falls apart, and they realize that this is not what we want to be doing, right? We don't have no money. They lose all their money. Dignan has a terrible time. He gets beat up.
Oh yeah, that's right. He does.
He gets the crap kicked out of him, right? And then Anthony kind of abandons him and get all the plot. But it's the scene where he comes back, and Anthony and Bob have kind of gotten their life together at that point. Like they've kind of learned their lesson, and they're ready to sort of transition into adulthood. And Dignan comes by, dressed like a child, dressed like in a jumpsuit on a mini
and the funny thing is, it's almost like he shows up from a later Wes Anderson movie. He's like, here I am, dressed like I'm from The Life Aquatic.
He's like a child, he's still in the fantasy, like where he was before. He hasn't grown out of it at all. Matter of fact, it's come stronger now. And he comes back, and Bob, who's also Bob's brother, who's also a Wilson brother, Future Man.
Yeah, Future Man is another Wilson
Future
brother,
Man, which I always love the nickname. I don't know how that Future Man, because I guess he's the older brother. I don't know.
No, it's so funny, yeah. And what's great about that is they don't explain it to you.
They don't explain
it. He's Future Man.
That's Future Man. Like, okay, but yeah, that subtle humor is so perfect. But he rips on like, hey, what do you? You look like a tiny banana, and he's just like downtrodden all of a sudden.
No, and yeah, he's that was such a that's like one of those, like, that's the example of like Wes Anderson doing what he now does perfectly in the early version of it. It was so beautiful because it's funny, first of all, the comedy plays, and then they leave and it's really sad because
it's really sad.
Yeah, he's really hurt.
Yeah,
he
crushed his dream,
and it's very childlike because you can understand that when you're a kid, you think this is the coolest thing in the world. You show up to school in your new shirt or your whatever, and then someone craps on it and they make fun of it, and it just destroys you. And especially if it's someone for whatever reason you think is cool, and obviously, and a lot of time when you're young like that, you think that put on confidence is cool. You misinterpret that, and that's what it is. Future Man is like the fake tough guy, which he then gets put in his place by, and it's James a nice Caan. Moment by James Caan,
Great
by
moment.
Sonny Corleone, who, like you said, is the most over the top performer in the movie, and it kind of works in a way. But when he has that moment, it's great because it then also redeems Bob. Even though he's talking to Bob, it also redeems Dignan because the insult that came to him. Obviously, we know that if you're listening to this episode, you've seen this movie. That then the whole trick is that, like, little bit of a twist on the ending is then he robs Bob's house. And I love how when they show it, that I remember the first time I watched it, I don't think I processed that was happening. I don't think I got it. And then fortunately, when they have that moment at the prison later, he's like, hey, rob Bob's house. And they're just all, and even Bob is like, it just happened. Like, he's sad.
It's like, almost like, I bet he got that grand piano. That grand piano's worth $5,000. Like, it's like,
yeah,
he's admiring James Caan, even though all this
the baby grand.
He wants to be James Caan. Yeah, he wants to be James Caan. It was this whole thing, Yeah.
He's like, I thought about robbing him.
Yeah, I thought about robbing that place too.
So the movie, like you said, is kind of broken down. You have the first section that ends in the bookstore heist, and they're sort of on the run where that's where, like, you have the stuff with the romance with Inez and just kind of more character building, and then they move on again, and then it kind of breaks apart as it just, like you said, it just doesn't work in that. And when Bob leaves, and Ding, he didn't want to tell him. He just didn't want to tell him because he doesn't want to upset him. I just love that it's like he didn't want to bother him. But he's like, oh, Bob, Bob's got stuff with his brother he's going to help him deal with.
His brother got caught with the weed
the weed in the yard, right?
The weed in the yard. So Bob,
okay. Again, I missed that. Like,
he wants to be kind of a criminal too, when he's interviewing him.
But like, for whatever reason, he's a phony too. But in Dignan's mind, he's a success somehow.
He's the only one with a car. That's what he said. I really want to be the part of this team, and I'm the only one with a car. He's like, that's great, because that hits me right here. And again, that's like the great the subtle acting by Owen Wilson because it's just so funny. Like, that hits me right here. That's you're the one with the car.
And now I can't remember if it's in just the short or if it's also in the feature. But when they're talking about the planning the book heist, he's like, we are in charge of inside and this and that. And, he's explaining it all. And he's like, but you, Bob, the car, that is your territory. Like, he's like trying to like downplay it and minimize it. And like, there's great moments that are character, like the quirk in a character. And it's both in the short and the feature, but it plays differently. And it's the planning meeting when they have the gun on the table. And he's like mad that he's picking up the gun. He's like, I need the gun on the table. It's just like this weird.
I can't focus.
Yeah, but it's like the reason he needs it's like it's his gangster fantasy that is being broken by you playing with the gun. The gun's got to be there on the map because it's got to look a certain way. Because he's like, influenced by Gamester. He's influenced by the character James Caan played as opposed to the character within the reality of the film. And then, but they're just, and then even after all that, Anthony also takes the gun because at that point it's like they can't resist playing with the gun. They can't resist
because they're kids. Because they're still kids trying to live out this like adult, what they think is an adult fantasy. Like, I'm going to be a robber. And they don't really know what they're doing or how to do it. So it's just like, he's right. You're absolutely exactly right. Like where he's got to have everything on the table. It's got to be perfect. You don't see in Dick Tracy his goons, fiddling around looking at the gun. So he wants everything to be like
exactly. They're all like, in rapt attention, looking at him, like planning how we're gonna do this kind of thing. Exactly. And you don't pick up his gun and mess with it and look at it. And it's
Bob, you're the zero out in the car.
The scene before that where they actually get the guns. And that's the funny thing where we talked about very briefly at the beginning how the part of the failure of this movie was they didn't know how to market it because they didn't know what they had. And they're selling it as the tagline, Reservoir Dogs for Geeks. Like, this has nothing to do with Reservoir Dogs. Like, nothing. They're just both about a heist vaguely. This is more about a heist than that movie is. That is about the sort of aftermath of it anyway. But point being is they on the poster they showed the image of them holding the guns when they're shooting. It like looks more like actiony than it is, whereas in the movie it's a comedy sequence where they're trying to find the coolest guns.
That's
what it is. And you get the one of the staples of this movie that we haven't talked about is the Wes Anderson music. The deep cuts of people like and the stuff that really makes it have personality beyond especially in this, because Wes Anderson, for probably two reasons, he hasn't yet established yet, and budgetary reasons, what the Wes Anderson visual aesthetic would become. And we would see it in Rushmore a lot, and then I think you mentioned much more in Tenenbaums, and then that Life Aquatic is like boom,
turns the dial up,
and then it's a straight line. This is what my movies are like.
When you figure out what works for you, you just run with it.
Exactly. No, totally. But you see that there's those moments in this that are touching on the become those touchstones for him later, and that's one of those scenes that plays in the movie perfectly. But when you market it, it doesn't look like it's like no, this doesn't on the poster. This doesn't look like it looks in the film. You're changing the context. It's two different things. And then you're mentioning Reservoir Dogs at the top.
It's not. They're not hard criminals. That's the whole point. They're almost children trying to play hardcore. Yeah, you mentioned about the music. The music is good. I mean, it's a really good soundtrack, and he definitely knows how to integrate music well. I mean, I think after Rushmore was the big one where that's a great soundtrack to where he intermixes just different types of music. And here it's like, I know he has Love in the beginning, that first scene. I think that's one of the things that hooks me in that first scene is not the first scene when they come back to rob Anthony's house as a test plan, right? Which you don't know at first. You're like, because again, that beginning is so fast paced, it just hooks you where you're just like, the kind of humor, he's breaking him out of the hospital, okay, that's kind of funny. Then the dialogue back and forth, they're planning everything, okay, and then they're just talking, they're walking, and they're like, what is going on? And all of a sudden Love starts playing, and it just like you hear that drums and they're robbing the house, and it's really actually, you really can accentuate the action of the scene, or what's happening in the scene very well, and it doesn't hammer you over the head. It's not like they're playing something that's not subtle, but it's very good.
And I know that one thing that I read was I think that the final song, I think it's a Rolling Stone song they end up using at the end, like the slow motion sequence. But I remember I read that Wes Anderson wanted to use a Bob Dylan song that they couldn't afford. And so that is a consideration that now he can get the money for those. And probably in part, it's like, hey, can I have this song? That, you know, not like, because I'm sure that even Wes Anderson has a constraint. Here's your budget you work with, because we know what you can make your movie for, that it's still then profitable, you know. And he's again, he keeps making movies, so he's probably found whatever that magic formula is. Plus, they're like studios like the Prestige Pictures as well that get, you know, accolades and awards as Oscar season approaches as we record this, even though I don't know if people really care about the Oscars anymore. But the point being is that studios, that's another sort of cachet. And Wes Anderson, I think, has both those things where his movies make enough money, but they also get some, you know, critical acclaim, which it's like, okay, those are two good things. But when you're making your first film, and I'm sure the songs were a hunk of that budget, even there in that film, because it's a lot of things. You're like these deep cuts from big time people, or you know the Wes Anderson thing. Find the most obscure Bob Dylan song, Rolling Stone song, you name it. And I think then, like you said, then Rushmore really expanded beyond that simplicity. And then even in Aquatic, where it was the David Bowie songs in Portuguese.
Yeah, which is fantastic. I mean,
and the guy was in the movie. So it was just, you know, such a unique way to.
Yeah.
Like there's one point in the way the music plays that it was a great use of it, where it's like the montage when they're separated, I think, and after they all leave and he's not with Inez. And
is it the Pretenders? Is it the Pretenders or no, the Proclaimers? I can't remember.
I'm not sure.
Done with? Yeah.
But then the song is playing, and then Inez is sitting at a table, and she's like reading. I think it's like playing over. Maybe she's reading. I don't know what it is. But then she shuts off the radio, and she like kills the music. And it's that one thing where it's like, you know, in film it's a diegetic and non-diegetic sound. So diegetic is Aaron has a fan in his background. If you probably can't, but these mics aren't going to pick that up. But that's diegetic sound where you film that. There's a famous beginning of Apocalypse Now. It's famous for playing with the idea of that, where the fan blades become the sound of a helicopter. So it's like, it's the diegetic and non-diegetic, where music playing, like American Graffiti is another great example, where the music playing, it's like all meant to be diegetic, where it's in the world of the film, as opposed to this, where it seemed to be non-diegetic, meaning it seems like it's playing for us, the audience, and not the characters in the film. And then click, she shuts that off. So it also like kind of grabs you in a different way too, where the things that Wes Anderson would play with in different ways later in films, he's starting to like touch and dabble with. And again, before he had the cachet to be Wes Anderson, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think that when they fly out of town on Zorro's back, and you know they're shooting the fireworks out, you know, like after they get the money, you know, it's really great. There's some really great movies. Yeah, it's the Proclaimers over in Democrat. Okay. I know it's a good song too. Yeah, it's got a lot. I mean, I think you're right. He gets better at it, and he also probably has more available budget to work with, I'm sure, in the later films too, which I guess probably that's when you start to see like Kinks and Who and then you know what I mean, like, oh, okay, now we can actually afford whatever we want.
So as we sort of wrap things up, we talked about it a little bit, but let's talk about the ending of the film and where sort of, it's just, I guess not necessarily, we kind of mentioned it, but let's talk about like how it lands. That's a weird way of saying it, because it's so in the film, you know, builds up to they get back together, the band's back together, Bob has to be in it, everybody has to be in it, and then it's the big heist moment, And in that, I have a visitor. Hey, Penny, come here. Come say hi. I want to show you my friend. This is my friend Aaron. Come here. Say hi. So we were talking about Wes Anderson's Rushmore. That's a movie. Have you seen that movie? You haven't seen that movie.
No, that's too old for her.
Yeah, you can watch it someday, though. So in that part, we're, as we said, we're building up, and there's the big heist, and it's the culmination, and then it's just a comedy of errors, and quite literally. And that's where, if you have if there's broad comedy in this film, this is the part where it happens, where all this stuff goes crazy and silly. It's the comedy part of the movie where, you know, they set off the smoke alarm, and then Applejack has a heart attack and all that stuff, and then he accidentally shoots the gun, and all these things that just happen. And the great moment where, what's the character's name, where he's like, in the elevator, he's like, I screwed up, man, I screwed up.
Kumar, is it Kumar?
Kumar, yeah, but the way he was saying it, repeating it over and over, which is like that Wes Anderson sort of thing where a character talks in a way that you wouldn't expect him to, and the comedy comes from that, you know, and that's what you have happen there, right, Penny?
Man, I do it, man.
Come on, what are you doing in the freezer?
I don't know, man. I lose my touch, man.
Dignan kind of freaking out at him. Did you ever have a touch to lose, man? Like, you know, it's very funny, but and again, I think it goes back to what you were saying before. Like, you didn't notice at the end that James Caan originally was like robbing his house, but then when you realize that, and then you go back, you're like, oh wait, this all like completely, it makes more, you know, you can just kind of brush off the robbery as they don't know what they're doing. They're just kids. They're trying to do this, but actually James Caan set them up. And then you go back further and you're like, wait a sec.
No, like exactly, like they might have been successful had he not interfered with them. It might have
kind of gave them the worst guys, right?
Exactly, like if they just had, if Applejack just doesn't fake a heart attack, it might still work. They might still, you know, even though the guys show back up and, you know, you're not supposed to be here. You go to lunch every day. He's like, well, not every day.
Not every day.
I love that part of it is why it works. And it's a Wes Anderson thing, is even though they have guns, they're not threatened by them. They're not scared. They're just like, here's these guys here to rob the place. The bookstore thing with like the bags of money. Like the little bags of money, and that's something that's in the short. Like I said, they talk about that, but you don't actually see it. So it's kind of funny if you had seen the short and then you get to see the movie, you're like, oh my gosh, they actually show that scene now. So the way it plays is really cool.
Yeah, the little touches too, like the why are you wearing the tape on your nose? Like, exactly. There's no reason. He's just doing it to do it. Like,
and what they describe is exactly in the short. It's really funny because they talk about it. They're telling Bob about it later, and he's like, "Oh, really, really, really?" And everything is exactly the same. You want to grab a toy? Yeah, I'll put you to sleep soon, right? You came down here because you want me to put you to sleep. Yeah. So obviously this will be on video on YouTube, but those of you who might be listening, my daughter Penny is joined me for the last little bit of this film. So I guess we'll sort of wrap this up. Do you have any final thoughts on Bottle Rocket and Wes Anderson and his influence on your Watsonness?
My Watsonness. I mean, I think, man, you know, again, this is one of my favorite films. I don't think it's gotten old in any way. I mean, I've watched it again. I actually watched a little bit, like at least the first half with my oldest, and he was laughing at all the parts that I laugh at. So I'm like, okay, this is good. That it's not like it's not like it was just me and my weirdness that it appealed to me. There's some universal appeal here. You know, it's a shame
that's saying weirdness is genetic.
It's genetic. That's okay, fine. It could
be
genetic.
I hope it is.
We don't know.
I hope it is. Right?
If it is.
Is it?
Yeah, no, you never know. But yeah, it's definitely an underappreciated movie in his repertoire. And you know, I really hope one day he turns it down a little bit. I think he's found this style. I mean, there's no doubt he's made some great films of the year. But you know, I wonder if he could maybe go back to that a little bit and make a more straightforward movie that is, you know, not as so heavy emphasis on visual style and stuff like that, because I think this was really good. I think its only flaw is it's just not over the top in any way. It's just a really well done, well acted, funny little story, and that's doesn't get enough love.
I agree. And it's funny. I like that you said that. So yeah, thinking about like, I don't know that I think I might have actually seen Rushmore before I eventually did see this. And I think I know you talked about it way before that. And I was hearing about it, but then it was Rushmore was the one that got all the hype and all the buzz. And that was like, okay, I'll see Rushmore. And then it's like, okay, hey, Watson, can I borrow your copy of Bottle Rocket? And I'm pretty sure I did. I think it was like recorded off of Cinemax or whatever. Like,
Cinemax, probably.
Yeah, not like you owned a copy of it. It was like, no, the copy you recorded off the television on VHS, which we're definitely showing our age here. And with that though, I think I as I kind of talked about here and there, I can see the influence of Wes Anderson's work in this film in my own personal humor, in my writing, in my own, just the way I see the world. And I like what you said there, because I think I live in a world where my mind works like the Wes Anderson character, but I live in the real world. And Wes Anderson's characters don't live in the real world anymore.
They don't.
And I would love to see a movie, I still want to see his unique vision of the world, but I also want to see a movie where, like, if he ever made a sequel, this is the movie to make a sequel to. Yeah. I think. I would love to revisit these characters later in just sort of a more tonally normal world setting, and I think that's a really interesting thing. But I would assume not. But just even if it's not a Bottle Rocket sequel, maybe the quote spiritual sequel where you have similar character dynamics, so you can have an Owen Wilson, a Luke Wilson, and maybe even Bob can come from wherever he's been at for all these years and come together to have that interplay in a setting that's the world we live in and not the world Wes Anderson's movies exist in, as much as I love them.
Yeah, they're fantastic. Yeah, Diggin never grows up, maybe, and he tries to pull them back in for one more heist. You never know. He gets out of jail. Maybe that's the plot. Who knows? Yeah.
So thank you so much to my good friend Aaron Watson for joining me. I like to talk about movies, and I knew this was a movie I want to talk about, and I knew the person right away that it would be special to talk about. And hopefully he'll be back for some other movies. We watched a lot of Star Wars together as kids. I had a thing in my notes about how the first time I was quoted on the internet was on Aaron's website about Star Wars Episode 1. My quote was, "George Lucas is a freaking genius." But it also makes me think of how we saw that, how we viewed that movie when we first saw it, as opposed to how we see it now. And of course, how we're now re-seeing things because of the positivity of the Disney Plus sort of Star Wars stuff that's kind of like rekindling like the things we didn't think we loved because like they use a ship from it kind of thing. But all that said was, I had that in my notes, so that we go way back. It's awesome to talk to him as a friend, but specifically to talk about this movie. So thank you for watching with video here on YouTube, if you're seeing me and Penny. If not, again, Penny is here. She's quiet because it's a little bit past her bedtime, but I'm going to put her to sleep soon. And be sure to listen on every Apple. I'm not on Apple yet, but I'm getting things going with the show being on all kinds of podcast platforms. So whatever you listen to podcast, you should be able to find it. Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, wherever you listen to a podcast, I should be there. So please check it out. Links into my previous episodes will be below. Now Penny's laughing at me because I'm accidentally tickling her leg. That's parenting while trying to have a podcast, right? And so Penny's always in these videos, so it's fitting she should be an episode of Josiah's Right About Film. But thank you so much to anyone who's listening. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube or follow on the podcast stuff. I don't know how that works, but on YouTube, subscribe, hit the bell so you get notifications. And these episodes will be coming monthly. So by the time this one is out, I'll have these monthly, and I'll be hopefully a steady producer in terms of about film episodes where we take a singular look at a movie. And that's it. Today's episode of Bottle Rocket is over. You have anything to say? Bye, everybody. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you.
How do I just stop the recording?